So has anyone ever said, hey, you talk too much? Well, I love my next episode because it's a classic example. Taking a formula, something maybe people are saying, we don't like that you do that, and finding your genius zone. This woman is so inspiring, taking her gift for gab and turning it into a successful career and showing business owners how to use speaking the sports language, very meaningful in business conversations. So think about that deal that you could seal because you knew how to talk sporty to people. I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of Jen's book, Talk Sporty to Me. And I have to say, I am a converted football fan, a Seahawks fan. So I have to give a shout out. Go Seahawks! And the greatest thing about my job is I like to have fun. There is actually a formula in this. And my mom, I have to show you this. My mom actually made me this Seahawks inspired bag. Yes, this one of kind recyclable material. Woo, I love this. So I can bring this to the game. Woo, go Seahawks.
Frankie Lee, dimmi, quale senso della vita?
The meaning of life is to live la dolce vita, which is the formula for fabulous living.
Hi, my name is Heather Picken, and welcome to the La Dolce Vita Show, the formula for fabulous living. I'm the catalyst in helping you to be more confident, create your dream business, and attract elite clients and live a fabulous life. Here's Heather helping you to upgrade your life to
Fabulous. Upgrade your life to fabulous. Right, Frankie? You're fabulous.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of La Dolce Vita, the formula for fabulous living. And I'm so excited to have my guest today, and she has a very unique formula. It's a formula for making sports conversations useful for business. And I met my guest, Jen Mueller, a couple years ago. She was talking at one of the organizations that I belong to. And here I am, a woman not liking sports, and this woman was telling us, how to tie that into business. And it's kind of funny because flash forward now, I actually love sports. So I'm converted, Jen. I'm a sports fan. And I want to share a little bit about her background because I think it's really cool. She's America's expert talker, and she's really at a loss for words. She pursued a career in sports broadcasting after repeated comments of talks too much from her teachers and family members. I just love that, taking, what people would be perceiving as a problem and using that as her formula. So a 15-year-old sports broadcasting veteran, Jen currently serves as the Seattle Seahawks sideline radio reporter, and I did watch last Sunday's game. She is also a part of Seattle Mariners television broadcast team on Root Sports. In addition to her work on the sidelines, Jen launched Talk Sporty to Me in 2009 and teaches business professionals how to make sports conversations useful in business. And I just want to welcome you, Jen, to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you. And you're proof that it works. Sports works. You're a convert. I hope that you will share some of your stories today about
absolutely. It's funny. So this is kind of a funny personal story. So I was dating, it was in the dating world, and I remember going out with a guy that said he wouldn't go out with me because I didn't like sports. I'm like, that's crazy. And so now my boyfriend, when I met him, he's like, do you like sports? I'm like, no, I'm sorry. So here's what he did was different. Because my formula that I am really inspired by is always about business and strategy. So he showed me how football could really be applied, and that's kind of like what you do, but he talked about the strategy and the psychology behind it. And that really inspired me. And I've been watching the Seahawks games ever since, and the Huskies. So I'm sold.
Very good. See, you just had to figure out your niche, what you liked about sports before you could get hooked. That's awesome.
Absolutely. And I just want to show everyone to get this book. This is really good. It's Talk Sporty to Me. I believe they go to talksportytome.com to purchase this book. And it's such a great, it's a great read. But I want to ask you, Jen, if you could start back to where it all began. You know, you had this issue where your family and friends were saying, "Hey, Jen, you talk too much." So what was the moment in your life where you really uncovered that formula, you know, that you monetize today? You're doing something that you love.
Well, you know, I really have to give credit to a high school guidance counselor of mine. So I have always had the ability to talk. I have always had this voice. People ask me if I've had voice training. Nope, this is my God-given voice. And I've always been passionate about sports. I was an athlete through high school. I've always been interested in it. And a high school guidance counselor of mine asked me the question and said, you know, hey, Jen, you like to talk. You're not afraid to talk in front of people. Have you ever considered going into broadcasting? And at the time, I thought I was going to be a third grade Lutheran school teacher, which would also give me the ability to stand up in front of a lot of people, albeit younger people, and talk for a living. And I thought it was such a preposterous thing when she suggested it. Remember, this is in the late 90s. And you just weren't exposed to as much media then as you are now. So the thought of going into broadcasting seemed like a really far out there kind of thing. And I thought, you know, might as well give it a shot. I know that I would want to go into the sports realm. And so I took my broadcasting classes, and I guess you just kind of start following the path, right? You kind of think maybe big picture one day you'll reach some goals, but I just kind of put my head down and started going. And I figured if it didn't work out, all I had to do was take a few more classes. I could still go back to being a teacher. And here we are like 16 years later, and I'm actually working in the industry and doing what I want to do. So it all worked out the way that's better, in fact, than I could have ever hoped.
I love that. And one of the things that I help people do is take their vision, find out what's most unique to them. And a lot of times that can come from the biggest challenges that they have in their life, and put it into a formula where they can take their message, their mission, and their purpose out there into the world and be able to monetize that. And you're just a great example of how that's done. Now, I always like to ask people some of the challenges that they've had along the way. So being a female sportscaster, have you faced any challenges in the beginning of your career? And if so, what were those, and how did you navigate around those?
You know, I don't think the challenge was being a woman. And I tell people this a lot. If you go into something assuming it's going to be harder for you because of one thing or another, it probably will be. I didn't really have time to figure out what was going to be harder for me or not. Being in broadcasting, being in television is a really competitive industry, whether you are male or female. So I figured everybody just had challenges. I think in the late 90s, there weren't very many female sports broadcasters. There was a couple around, but not nearly as prevalent. So I think part of it was just making sure that that I built the right reputation, that I knew my stuff, and I didn't get upset when people would ask me 2 or 3 times a question and then turn to my male counterpart and ask him the same question to make sure that I actually had the right answer. I was a football official for 10 years. I started that in college, and that really taught me a lot about knowing your stuff, being able to speak up, being able to hold your own, be poised under pressure, and all of those things. So I think that my challenges were the same as everybody else's. It's just how you were going to deal with them. I will actually say that one of the biggest challenges, and you talk about monetizing your talent, and now I can kind of laugh at it because I don't have to check my bank account before I go to the grocery store. You don't make a whole lot of money in broadcasting. You know, my first job was a $20,000 a year job, and it stayed that way for a long time. And so I think for, you know, the folks that you work with, know what monetizing that means. You know, I had to sacrifice a lot of hours and work a number of jobs to pay the bills and make ends meet. But it was worth it for me in the end because I knew what I wanted to do and I kept going down that path. So I think it's kind of the number of hours. Communications is a very subjective industry. when you think you have it right, somebody who's in charge might disagree with you, and there's no right or wrong answer, but whoever's signing your paycheck, they get to decide what they like and what they don't.
Absolutely. You know, I like what you said, and I really want our listeners and viewers to get this, is that it's how you go into it, just like a game. I'm talking sporty. Like a game. You've got to have your head in the game. You've got to have a strategy. And if you're perceiving, like in a football game, if you're perceiving your opponent to have the edge, oh, they've got a higher record than our team, then yeah, you're gonna lose. But if you have that mindset, like you had, like that vision of, I'm gonna do this, it doesn't matter if I'm female, I'm just gonna do the best job that I can, then that's when you really come out winning.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's true for just about anything that you want to do. And strategizing all the little things. It's not just the big things. And I think that this is where people get a little bit sideways, is that they strategize, the classes that they're going to take in college and the degree that that's going to translate to, and then the job that leads to. Well, you really need to look at, how are you strategizing just relationship building in your career? How are you strategizing conversations? How do you know when to take advantage of some of these opportunities that are right there in front of you, but don't necessarily have a job title next to them, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. And that kind of, when we kind of move into using the sports as a way of, hey, we can talk business. It really is, we need a plan. We need an overall marketing plan. What does that look like? What are you doing? I always say you've got to measure your metrics. So if you're taking an action, what is the result of taking that action? And then tying that into, because you wrote this whole book, Talk Sporty, and tying this into a business conversation. So what are some of the ways, so we have the marketing, the strategizing down, but let's take this a step further. What would give someone a competitive edge by using the tools that you talk about in the book in a business conversation?
Well, there's a few different ways that you can do that, but let's go back to the very beginning and just kind of the base level of small talk. How often do we strategize the small talk that you would have in everyday situations? Networking events, in an elevator, walking through the office and talking to people that you might not engage with on a regular basis, but if you know how to strategize the small talk, and if you use sports, you can open the doors for bigger business opportunities. One of the studies that I read recently, and it was talking about some of the challenges that women in particular have with not getting promoted or not getting the opportunities that they want. And what they found was that women felt like they were being talked over in meetings and that they weren't being consulted on some of these bigger projects where they had opinions or experience. And here's what I would say to that. Just like when I go into a locker room, I cannot only talk to the players when I need an interview, because they'll recognize that that's the only reason I'm in there. And why would they only give me the time of day when I need something, right? I have to make sure that I'm building relationships with every single one of those guys, because you don't know after the game which one is going to be, the star or the key player. I need to have relationships with all of them. You need to have the same relationships with people that you work with. And that starts with small talk. And if you give people an opportunity to talk about what they want, they will give you a foot in the door to bigger conversations. Sports, quite often, is that foot in the door, because more than half of all Americans are sports fans. And you don't have to be the most passionate fan in the world, but if you're willing to listen to somebody who is, boy, that goes a long way, because now they want to talk to you more often. And I guarantee you that unless you are a sports broadcaster, that conversation isn't going to last for hours. It's not even going to last for 5 minutes. Eventually, the conversation is going to turn to business. You'll be there when it does, and suddenly your opinions, they carry weight and they are sought after.
I love that. And as you're talking, I was just thinking about when my boyfriend and I will get together, we'll watch the game and we'll talk about like the strategy. And what's really interesting is that I find it also connects us, talking about, just building it on a business level, but also on a relationship level, like a personal level that you can actually, have this amazing connection. So personal life and business.
Well, that my husband is an introvert. And so getting him to just open up and tell stories can be a challenge. And on our first couple of dates, it on his family. I live in Seattle. It goes back to where he grew up. I found out about his family, where he grew up, his sister, the vacations that they took, the experiences going to the games. It was way better than playing 20 questions and being potentially awkward. It was the storytelling behind the sport. So I totally agree that it's relationship building on any level that allows you to get to know people a little bit.
Absolutely. No, I just love it. And I know a lot of times, when I'm working with people on their business, we strategize both online and offline. So let's talk about some of those marketing strategies. One of the biggest things I know people freak out about is networking. So give us an example going into a networking meeting and not knowing anyone. How would you use that?
Well, so I often say that I can, within 20 seconds, make a connection in any room because I talk sports and I drink whiskey. I become a very popular person in any room. But here's what sports does for you in that situation. Number one, it gives you a connection point, as we said, with more than half of all Americans. So that's about 165 million people, which means you can walk into a room and know that there is a percentage of the room that are sports fans. Number two, if you can make a business tie to sports, just like you're doing, now it's not about me and my elevator pitch. It's just about making the connection. But here's where sports and networking really pays off. There are built-in follow-up opportunities. And how often do we go to networking events? We have the best intentions of following up, or maybe we send that initial email, but we don't come back a couple of months later, a few weeks later. Business does not happen after one exchange or one conversation, right? You've got to figure out a way to stay on the radar. And sports does that naturally. If you go to a networking function this week and you find out that there's a football fan there, well, I tell you what, now you can follow up and wish that fan good luck for this weekend's game. You can email them next week about the outcome of the game. You can mark specific dates on the calendar where you know that there's a big matchup or the playoffs or the end of the season or the start of training camp. You can fill out an entire 12-month calendar and stay on somebody's radar. And that's really what you're trying to do in networking. You're trying to build a relationship or get a first step at building a relationship. And then when you can plan out the rest of your communication, that's the benefit of sports.
I love this. And I also see this, you could use some of this, like just sending someone a text, like you plan everything out. Yep. Hey, I see so-and-so is playing today, go Huskies.
That's exactly right. And, I tell you what, here's the other thing about business folks. Most of the time, executives in big markets in big cities, but most of the time executives across the board, they are following sports storylines. They might not be the most passionate fans in the world, but executives know what drives the economy, what gets their employees talking, what influences just their community, and sports is going to be a part of it, which means this. If you're trying to connect with people, if you are trying to get a meeting with an executive, you don't have to know anything about him or her, but you could email them or call them after a big sporting event, and I guarantee you they're going to know what you're talking about. And sports fans talk to other sports fans, period, end of story. You and I are talking sports together. You are a recent convert into sports. I am a lifelong sports fan, but we're on the same level, right? We can still talk about it. CEOs can talk to recent college grads if they're sports fans. There's no steps in here. It kind of puts everybody on the same level. And again, It's about building that relationship. The business stuff comes later.
Absolutely. I just love what you're saying. And I just want to reiterate it to people to say, it's kind of getting your foot in the door. You're not necessarily asking for the sale. You're creating community connection and using the vehicle of sports, to make it happen. And of course, it also makes it fun.
It does. It does. And people want to talk about stuff other than business. Look, the athletes that I work with, they want to talk about things outside of football and outside of baseball. But if those are not your primary jobs, then you are looking for an escape. And sports does that. And I'm also going to point this out because I know that somebody's watching this and thinking, yeah, but not everybody's a sports fan. What happens if I ask somebody about the game last night or about the Huskies game this weekend or about the Seahawks and they say that they're not a sports fan, right? Because there's that risk. And here's what I would say. I don't really care what the answer is. If I ask you, did you see the game last night? Are you planning to watch the game next weekend? The answer is going to be one of two things. It's either going to be yes or no. If the answer is yes, you can follow up with other sports-related questions. If that person says no or says, I'm not a sports fan, then it's up to you to play the little journalist role and to ask questions about, oh, well, what are you going to be doing this weekend? Oh, well, what did you do last night? And it allows them to draw a big old bullseye around what they want to talk about. So either way, it's promoted a productive conversation where you're getting to know somebody.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that, Jen. And I look at the bigger picture. It's like if you know a little bit about everything, not just sports, it really just expands your knowledge base. It's kind of like being a polymath, knowing a little bit of everything. And yes. I look for the formulas and everything. So when I'm looking at football, I'm looking at how they're marketing, I'm looking at strategy, looking at human behavior, how it also relates to buying behavior, the psychology. So it makes things, in my opinion, more interesting.
It does. And how about this? If you're looking at football in particular, because I know that you've just gotten into this, the entire season, and let's take Pete Carroll, for example, is a giant business plan. The football season is 16 regular season games, and Pete Carroll in particular loves evaluating after each quarter of the season. So after game 4, he was able to go back and evaluate. At the halfway point, after 8 games, he went back and evaluated. And he does this throughout the year. It's no different than a business owner who knows what they want their end result to be, and you're trying to set the game plan, and you're trying to set the business plan for getting there. Pete Carroll does the same exact thing. It just shows up in different ways. His metrics look different. His resources look different. But I guarantee you, after being around him for a number of years, he approaches it much like an entrepreneur and a business owner does.
I love that. And it's funny that you mentioned it because my boyfriend and I were talking about, what he does, why he's such a great coach. And again, I tie it into business. It's really interesting to see that success leaves clues. Success is a formula. You just have to find the formula that makes you most unique and authentic and be able to do that. And in using sports, I think is just a great way to broaden your horizons. I'm sold.
Good. Good. Yes, we know that you are a satisfied customer of sports now.
Absolutely. It is a game changer in my life. And, especially when my boyfriend is having meetings with other people or dinners, they're always talking sports. So now I can go in there and I can relate to them. I'm like, oh yeah, did you see that play last Sunday? And, da, 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 da. And, I might not know every single thing about football, but I can relate it in a way where I can join the conversation instead of being an outsider.
Right. And how about this? So if we're talking about a specific play in a game, or if we're talking about something in sports, you can actually use that to start a bigger conversation about something that needs to be addressed. So let's say that there is somebody that you're working with, a client who is not very respectful of time. and is not great with deadlines, or is just not great with, showing up when they're supposed to show up. If there's a game and there's poor clock management by a coach at the end of the game, you can actually lead with that and say, oh my gosh, did you see what they did at the end of the game? They wasted their timeouts. It was really poor clock management. They've got to learn how to manage that time better. Speaking of which, I think this is a good thing for you to explore right now and see how maybe you could tighten up some of your clock management. Now, maybe that's not the exact phrase, but how about when Doug Baldwin, the wide receiver, throws a touchdown pass to Russell Wilson, the quarterback? It's a trick play, and it's really fun to watch. Both of them had to step outside their comfort zone. In business, you're going to have to step outside your comfort zone every once in a while. So you could talk about that play specifically in the way that it scored the touchdown, in the fact that it was a trick play, the time of the game it was used, all of that good stuff. Or you could use it to start a bigger business conversation about how leaders take risks and step out of their comfort zone. Do you see how that works on both sides of it?
I absolutely love it. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. So really challenging everyone that's listening or watching and expanding your horizons, really getting into the strategy, speaking in metaphor so people can make that connection in their brain. I think that's really powerful. Jen, this has been a fabulous interview. Is there anything that you want to leave our viewers and listeners before we go today?
Well, I would say this. Don't be afraid to become a sports fan. It is not about memorizing stats or the rule book or anything like that. Sports conversations can be as complicated or as basic as you'd like. And I can help with that. Every Monday, I send out a list of conversation starters. It lands in your inbox by 7 a.m. You'll have topics to talk about all week long. And remember, it doesn't have to be the thing that you're most passionate about, but as you said, it's just another tool. So have this at your disposal. See the kind of doors that it opens up, because you are already the rock star. When it comes down to the nuts and bolts of it, you are the rock star. This just gives you another foot in the door.
I love that. Well, Jen, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Absolutely.
And I want to encourage everyone to get this book. This is such a great, fun read. If you go to talksportytome.com, you'll get her book. And you can also follow her on Facebook. I believe if you just type in her name, you can be a fan.
Yep, I'm there.
And I just want to challenge everyone that's listening today, do something out of your comfort zone, stretch yourself, learn about sports, especially if you have a relationship. It could be that you find, you put your foot in the door and that gets you the next sale, or it deepens a connection in your relationship. Until next time, this is Heather Picken. Take care. So if you found this show to be fabulous, share with your fabulous friends, rate, review, and subscribe on YouTube and iTunes. And I'll make sure I take a beatbox lesson, right? Or give my little chihuahua a bone. That's me. Fabulous.